The air shouldn't have tasted like copper. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the twin moons hanging low on the horizon like pale, lidless eyes. Not the way the ground beneath my boots seemed to breathe, a slow, rhythmic pulse that sent tremors up my shins every 4 seconds, like a heartbeat. No, it was the taste. Sharp, metallic, wrong in a way I couldn't name. I pressed my back against the dark stone of the archway, and I remember thinking, we are so far from home. My name isn't important. What matters is that I was there. I was part of the team that made the choice, and I have to live with that every single day. 6 of us had come down from the Helios Pact, our deep-range survey vessel, to study what the navigational system had flagged as a structured formation. That was the clinical term. Alien architecture. Ancient, enormous, impossible. 3 days before this moment, it had been nothing but a signal, a blip, a pattern too deliberate to be geological. Now it loomed over us like a cathedral. The structure had no doors. That should have been our first warning. It had walls of dark, glassy stone, almost obsidian, but not quite. When you touched them, they were warm. Not warm like rock that had absorbed sunlight. Warm like skin, like something just beneath the surface was alive, was aware, was waiting to see what you'd do next. Dr. Yara Voss, our xenolinguist, ran her gloved fingers along the surface and pulled back immediately. It reacted, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The pattern shifted under my hand. I looked. She was right. Thin lines of faint bioluminescent light had appeared where she'd touched. Pale violet, the color of a bruise, slowly spreading outward from her fingerprints like cracks in ice. And then, after about 5 seconds, they faded. Just like that, as if the wall had exhaled. We had been briefed, loosely, by the first survey drone. The planet was inhabited, a spacefaring civilization, Class 4 at minimum. The drones had caught only glimpses of them, tall, thin silhouettes moving in slow deliberation. They didn't appear aggressive. They had not approached the drones. They had simply watched. What we hadn't been briefed on, what nobody had thought to tell us, were the rules. About 40 meters from the main structure, there were markers. We saw them on day 1. Stone columns no taller than my chest, arranged in a wide circle around the entire compound. Each column had been carved with symbols, deep, precise etchings that Yara photographed obsessively, muttering to herself about semantic repetition and contextual anchoring. These are warnings, she told us on that first evening, back on the ship. Or instructions, maybe both. There's a word or a concept that repeats at the base of every single column. What does it mean? Our mission lead, Commander Holt, asked. Yara hesitated. My best translation? Something like contained, or sealed, or... She paused, staring at her notes. Do not unmake. Holt nodded slowly, the way he always did when he was filing something away, not as a warning, but as a data point. I should have pushed harder. We all should have. The second day, we moved closer. The markers didn't move. The structure didn't change. The air continued to taste of copper, and the ground continued to breathe. And somewhere in the distance, always in the distance, we could hear a sound that wasn't quite sound, more like pressure. A low, cycling hum that lived behind your sternum, in the space between heartbeats. The compound had no doors, but on the second day we found something else. There was a seam in the ground. Marcus, our geological survey tech, youngest of the 6 of us, always grinning, always pushing, found it while sweeping for subsurface anomalies. A perfect rectangle, roughly 2 meters by 3, pressed flush into the alien earth about 20 meters from the compound's eastern wall. "That's not natural," he said, kneeling, running the scanner over it. "That's cut, precision cut. The tolerances are microscopic." We gathered around it. The seam was barely visible. You had to crouch low and angle your light just right to even see it. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. It was a hatch, a door, not leading into the compound, but beneath it. "The markers," Yara said quietly. "They're not warnings about the building. They're warnings about what's under it." Nobody said anything for a long moment. Commander Holt crouched and pressed his palm flat against the seam. Nothing happened. He pressed harder. Still nothing. He looked up at Marcus. "Can you open it?" And here is where I need to slow down. Because this is the moment. This is where the story pivots from exploration to catastrophe, from wonder to horror, from curiosity to the kind of regret that doesn't have a cure. I should have said no. I should have grabbed Holt by the shoulder and pulled him back and said, "Yara told us. The markers told us. The whole planet is telling us." But I didn't. None of us did. Marcus could open it. It took him 11 minutes and a subsonic pulse emitter, standard geological survey equipment, nothing exotic, to find the resonant frequency that made the seam shiver, then separate, then release. The sound it made was not mechanical. It was not the grind of stone or the hiss of hydraulics. It was a tone, a single, pure, devastating tone, low and mournful and enormous, that radiated outward from the hatch and seemed to pass through us rather than around us. I felt it in my back teeth, in my fingertips. And then the hatch rose. Warm air flooded upward. Not the thin, copper-edged air of the surface, but something denser, older, saturated with a smell I still can't fully describe, like burning cedar and ocean salt, and something sweet and wrong underneath, like fruit left too long in the sun. The chamber below was lit, not artificially. The walls themselves glowed, that same bioluminescent violet, but stronger here, pulsing in slow waves that moved from floor to ceiling in a rhythm that matched almost exactly the heartbeat of the ground above. In the center of the chamber, suspended in the air by absolutely nothing, was a sphere, black as the void between stars, perfectly smooth, about the size of a human head, and it was spinning, lazily, slowly, like a planet in miniature, turning and turning in that warm, humming light. Yara made a sound, not a word, just a sound, somewhere between awe and fear. Holt was already moving down the steps. "Commander, it's contained," he said, not looking back. "Whatever it is, it's been contained down here for God knows how long. We document it. We don't touch it." Famous last words. It wasn't Holt who touched it. It was me. I want to be honest about that. I've replayed this moment so many times. I've tried to assign blame, tried to distribute it, tried to say it was Holt's leadership, or Marcus's technology, or the mission's fundamental hubris. But in the end, it was my hand, my fingers, my choice. I stepped forward, and I reached out, and I touched the sphere. It was cool. That surprised me. Everything else in the chamber was warm, but the sphere was cool, like glass that had been sitting in shadow, smooth beyond any earthly surface I'd ever felt. Not a single imperfection, not a single seam or grain. For exactly 1 second, nothing happened. And then the sphere stopped spinning. The light in the chamber died. Not dimmed, died. Instant, total darkness. And in that darkness, the pulse of the ground above us stopped. The heartbeat, gone. The constant low hum I'd been hearing for 2 days ceased, as if it had been cut with a blade. Absolute silence. Then the screaming started. Not human screaming. Something else. A sound from outside, from the surface, from the direction of the compound. High and layered and wrong, like dozens of voices that had never learned to be separate from each other. A sound that bypassed my ears entirely and went straight to some ancient animal part of my brain that only knows one word: run. Oh no. Oh no, no, no. I grabbed the sphere. Instinct, stupidity, I don't know. And it burned. Not physically, but somehow deeper. A cold burn, spreading from my palm up my wrist, my forearm, filling my chest with a pressure like drowning. I dropped it. It did not fall. It hung in the air exactly where I'd released it, and now it was no longer black. It was the color of a wound, dark red, pulsing, and the spinning had reversed, counterclockwise now, faster, much faster. "We need to go," Yara said. Her voice was completely flat. That was somehow more terrifying than if she'd screamed. "We need to go, right now." We came up out of the hatch into a different world. The sky had changed. The twin moons were still there, but the light was wrong. Everything bathed in that same deep red, as if the atmosphere itself was responding to what we'd done below. The air had thickened. Breathing felt like inhaling warm cloth. The compound was moving, not the whole structure, the walls. The glassy obsidian surface was shifting, the texture rippling like disturbed water, and those lines of bioluminescent light, the ones that had appeared when Yara first touched the wall, were now blazing. Every centimeter of the compound's surface was alive with violet fire, running in cascading patterns too fast and too complex to follow. And the markers, the warning columns, they were sinking, slowly, deliberately, each one descending into the earth as if being pulled down from below, one by one, a countdown in stone. How many are left? Holt asked. Marcus counted. 14. Then we have 14. Commander. Yara's voice. She was pointing. They were coming out of the compound. Not through a door. There were still no doors. They came through the wall. Those tall, thin silhouettes from the drone footage, except now, up close, they were nothing like I'd imagined. 8 feet tall, minimum. Limbs too long, jointed in places that made no anatomical sense. Their skin, if it was skin, was the same dark, glassy material as the compound, and it shifted and rippled just like the walls, like they were the walls, like the building and the beings were the same organism, awakened together. There were 12 of them. Their heads had no features I could identify as faces, just smooth planes and angles, and at the center, a single cluster of light, that violent red, pulsing in perfect synchrony with the sphere below. They knew. Of course they knew. They had always known. We were never the ones in control here. They didn't chase us. They didn't need to. We ran, back toward the landing site, which was nearly 2 kilometers of alien terrain across low scrubland that now felt like it was tilting, like the planet itself was listing toward us. And they simply moved. Not fast, not urgently, but every time I looked back, they were closer than the laws of physics should have allowed. The ground had resumed its heartbeat, but wrong now, faster, arrhythmic, and with each pulse, the soil around our feet seemed to soften, then harden, like running across the surface of something that hadn't decided yet whether to swallow us. Tomas, our medic, fell. I heard him go down, and I wheeled around, and he was sinking. Not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly, the ground drawing him in from the ankles up, like quicksand in slow motion. His face was calm, which was the worst part. The pressure from the sphere, the field it had released, was touching all of us now. That cold, drowning sensation, dulling the fight or flight, replacing panic with a terrible, creeping stillness. Tomas! Marcus and I pulled him free. It took both of us, took every ounce of leverage we had, and the sound the ground made when it released him was a sound I don't want to write down. Some sounds belong only in nightmares. We kept running. Behind us, the 12 figures kept walking. Yara was talking, half to us, half to herself, as we ran. It was a seal, she said between breaths. Not a specimen, not an artifact, a seal. What the markers said, contained, do not unmake. The sphere wasn't in the chamber. The sphere was the chamber. It was holding something inside the planet itself. She stopped speaking. We all stopped running. The ground ahead of us had cracked. A fissure, 20 meters wide, cutting directly across our path to the landing site. And from that fissure, light was rising. Not violet, not red, white. Absolute, sourceless, terrifying white, rising in a column that went up and didn't stop, disappearing into the sky. The humming was back, louder now, not behind our sternums, inside our skulls. I understood then what we had done. The sphere hadn't been protecting something dangerous from us. It had been protecting this world from something that lived inside it. Something old. Something the inhabitants had spent, Yara later estimated, hundreds of thousands of years sealing away, something that had needed a constant keeper, a constant contained rotation, a perpetual lock. And I had stopped it with my hand because I was curious. The horror of it didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, and each wave was colder than the last. They surrounded us at the fissure, all 12 figures arranged in a perfect arc, not blocking us from the light, but between us and the way back. The compound, visible in the distance, was fully ablaze now with violet fire. The sinking markers had all descended, gone, the countdown complete. The one at the center of the arc stepped forward. Up close, I could see the surface of its body shifting constantly, not randomly, but in patterns. The same patterns as the walls, the same patterns as the sphere had shown before I touched it. And the cluster of light at the center of its face, the red pulse, slowed, steadied, fixed on me. It raised one too long arm, and it pointed at the fissure, not at us, at what we'd done. Then it pointed at me. I have never felt so thoroughly understood and so completely condemned in the same moment. There was no rage in the gesture, no panic, only something that felt devastatingly like grief, an ancient grief, the kind that comes not from loss, but from witnessing the predictable failure of something you'd spent everything protecting. We were not invaders to them. We were not enemies. We were children who had wandered into a room we didn't understand and knocked something irreplaceable off a shelf. And the difference, I realized, standing there at the edge of that blinding fissure, the difference between those two things doesn't change the outcome at all. Here is what we found out later, what the data told us when we were back on the Helios Pact, shaking, silent, two of us sedated by Tomas because the alternative was worse. The sphere hadn't just been a seal. The sphere had been a negotiation. Tens of thousands of years ago, this civilization had made contact with what lived beneath their world, a force of pure entropic energy, something that predated the planet itself, something that had been dormant but was not, technically, dead. And they had made a deal. They would contain it. They would maintain the seal. They would guard the chamber for as long as their civilization endured. And in exchange, the thing beneath would remain passive, would not consume from below, would let life continue on the surface. The sphere was not an artifact of that civilization. It was that civilization, their oldest, most sacred technology, the physical embodiment of a covenant that had preserved their world for longer than human beings have existed. And I had stopped it with idle curiosity and an outstretched hand. The white light from the fissure lasted 19 hours. We watched it from orbit, unable to look away. By the time it faded, the surface temperature of the planet had risen 6 degrees. The twin moon's orbital pattern had shifted by a measurable fraction. We didn't know what had gotten out. We didn't know if the beings had managed to reseal it. We didn't know if the deal still held. We still don't. There's a particular kind of regret that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't come as nightmares, though there are those too. It doesn't arrive with guilt that you can name and process and eventually set down. It comes as a constant, quiet awareness, like a splinter too deep to reach, that something in the universe changed because of a decision you made, and you will never know the full shape of that change. I touched something that wasn't mine to touch. I unmade something I didn't understand, and somewhere, on a world circling a distant star, a civilization that had maintained a covenant for longer than our species has had language, is living with the consequences of a moment that lasted less than a second. The markers were warnings. The walls were warnings. The taste of copper in the air was a warning. The sphere's cool, smooth perfection was a warning. Everything about that place was saying, in every language available to it, this is not for you. This has never been for you. Turn back. We have a habit, as a species, of mistaking wonder for permission, of confusing our ability to reach something with the right to take it, of walking into chambers sealed for reasons we don't comprehend and believing that because we can open them, we should. I've given this speech to 3 separate mission review boards since coming back. Every time they take notes. Every time they nod solemnly. Every time I watch them file it away, not as a warning, but as a data point. And every time I think of that figure at the fissure, pointing, not at me, at what I'd done. The universe is full of rules older than our sun. The tragedy is not that we can't read them. The tragedy is that we keep reaching anyway and calling it exploration.